Welcome to the Filmlings podcast,
A bi-weekly podcast where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is episode 123, One Last Job.
It's always one last job.
There's always one
For
last
the cops
job.
one week before retirement.
You know, what's interesting is that the one last job usually ends up being the one last job, but usually it's because the person dies at the end of the job and not because
so much death.
they have all the money that they need to live the rest
So
of their
much
life.
death. Yeah. There's actually, and there's a reason for that. What we're talking about today is heist movies.
Heist movies.
Which is really cool. We've got a wide selection of heist movies, from the serious to the silly to the foreign.
To the twisty.
Lined up for you today, including some that go bwah,
And some that go,
definitely. But I think we've kind of already talked about the heist genre a little bit before in the podcast. The heist genre is a subgenre of the crime film, typically focusing on the mechanics of a criminal caper, the assembly of a team. Everyone has their role they have to execute, and then you kind of weave the character stories into that background. It's a much clearer format than just saying a crime movie. But it does come from the noir genre itself, as it was heralded by the focus on procedure in the film The Asphalt Jungle, directed by John Huston, which came out in 1950, which we've covered on the show before, and we talked very extensively about how this is essentially the start of the heist movie.
mm-hmm.
Other early heist movies include one of my favorites, The Killing, which is from the late 50s, early 60s, I think, but it's by Stanley Kubrick, and it's really good. It's one of his...
also,
it's one of those movies you don't think about from him.
Yeah.
What's that?
I mean, there are several others that we have talked about on the podcast before, like Bonnie and Clyde. I can't remember if we actually talked about Bottle Rocket or not. I think we talked about Bottle Rocket.
Bonnie and Clyde is more of a crime movie than a heist movie.
It is, but technically they're all stealing crimes.
There's segments of heist in it. They dip into like heist genre subsets, but overall it's a bit different.
I'm just reading off this Wikipedia list and finding the ones we've already covered. We did Reservoir Dogs. I kind of had a feeling. No. Bottle Rocket's definitely a heist movie. It's a heist movie with a twist. Did we talk about The Usual Suspects? I don't think we did.
I don't think we've done The Usual Suspects.
Yeah, I don't think so. But that's a good one.
Again, anything where you think about somebody stealing something, but the focus of the movie and the thing that they really use to draw you in, especially in the trailer, is going to be like, okay, we have a team, we have this elaborate plan, we're going to draw you in.
But it's always the perfect plan, except for one thing.
It's always the perfect plan, except it never goes right.
Right.
Well, actually, no, that's wrong. Sometimes it does go right, and that happens today.
That's true.
But we're going to talk about that because that comes into play here. One of the interesting things with the heist genre that I'm really excited to look at is that it provides such a clear structure for how to build a movie, but it does leave space for improvisation and customization based on the story, both in terms of just, anytime you have a formula, you can riff on it, but also its formula only really covers like 2 out of 3 acts, assembly, plan, and then steal. And then the question is, how are you going to make that into 3 acts? And each of these movies today kind of have a different answer to that question.
Well, yeah. I mean, they do have the third act is usually comprised of what happens after the heist. I mean, in at least 2 of these films, the heist is like the dead center point of the film. Because
in Oceans, we don't end with a big long afterwards.
We spend a good amount of time of them kind of getting hunted down. Rififi definitely spends a long time, and we're just going through all our movies already.
So Oceans has a little bit of it, but
it's maybe not a full act.
The key to Oceans and what I'm talking about now is that it presents a very fast paced formula. So when you have a longer movie like Oceans, which is 2 hours, how are you going to fill up that time? And I think they did it on the front end, and we're going to get into how they did that when we get into the individual movie. But yes, obviously this pulls very deeply from the noir films, and we see a lot of actually noir. We're going through like a whole genealogy of genre right now.
I know.
Heist comes from noir, which in itself comes from gangster crime movies. Anything with like James Cagney from the late 20s, early 30s is the prime example, really. And those are heavily influenced by the dawning of the code, which didn't take effect until like the mid to late 30s, really. But still was kind of there to the point where criminals had to be punished. If you stole something, you had to be punished by the end of the movie. And that has a big influence on heist movies, and typically what happens after the successful heist in the heist movies. Although that's changed in more recent years when we don't want to see somebody get killed for stealing. We want to see a brilliant plan pulled off. But
it also depends on
the entire episode in the intro, Jonathan.
Yeah, I know, right?
Let's talk about what movies we're diving into today.
Yeah, so we're starting off with Rififi from 1955, also known as Du Rififi chez les hommes, which I probably messed up, but I did take a little bit of French, guys.
I don't know. They put S's on the ends of the words to say whether it's plural or not, but you don't pronounce the S.
Yeah.
So like I don't know what's going on with this language.
But it's an adaptation of Auguste Le Breton's novel of the same name, directed by Jules Dassin, who, interestingly, it was originally slated to be directed by French director Jean-Pierre Melville, which we will talk about because that's kind of important. This film, it started to remind me a lot of Le Samurai, which was directed by Melville. But Melville turned it over at some point to the American director, Jules Dassin, who was blacklisted at the time. So he was living in Europe because he could not get any work in Hollywood, which is pretty interesting. And there's actually some implications of that inside the story itself that we'll talk about. But in terms of awards at Cannes, it won Best Director, and it was nominated for the Palme d'Or. And then we'll be moving on to Ocean's 11 from 1960, directed by Louis Milestone, and heavily featuring the Rat Pack, which is one of the biggest draws of the film that we will talk about. And then our last film for the day will be Inception from 2010, because Alex, I got to get my Nolan in there.
Gotta get your Nolan on.
Directed by Christopher Nolan. Won at the Oscars Best Cinematography, Best Sound Mixing, Best Sound Editing, and Best Visual Effects. And it was nominated for Best Picture, Best Original Screenplay, Best Original Score, and Best Art Direction. And it is celebrating its 10 years today. Or not today, but this year. So that's fun.
Like today? This is when I can't imagine Inception was released in November.
I feel like we probably saw this film together in theaters.
We did. We saw it with a group of friends.
Yeah, this came out during our high school days.
I remember intense debates in the month after it came out about whether or not that top fell.
Yeah,
but of course, this was back when movies that weren't Marvel came out as blockbusters.
That's true.
This is like the very tail end of that.
Yeah.
But without further ado, let's jump into the individual movie deep dive, starting with Rififi from 1955. Jason, take it away.
Rififi from 1955. Tony Le Stéphanois has just been released from a 5-year prison sentence for a jewel heist when his friend Joe approaches him for a new smash-and-grab job that their friend Mario is proposing. Tony takes the job after some doubt to get money to impress his old girlfriend. The gang recruits an Italian safecracker, Caesar. Together, the four men embark on planning and executing an intricate and crafty heist on a jeweler's store. But the men will soon learn that living the life Rififi means you can steal, but others might steal from you.
All right, Jonathan, let's talk about Rififi. And before we get into the film craft of the movie, let's address some of the themes at the top, because it's in the title, it's in French, and it's not easily translatable because it's...
Apparently it's not even translatable to French people because they had to define it during the movie.
It's slang. It's really slang. And it came from the French word that came into use during World War I by the French military to describe a war zone, which they called a riff, which kind of makes sense. Like, I could get that. I could vibe with that word. But it came to be known kind of loosely translated as of a rumble amongst men. So, I mean, maybe the best translation is a kerfuffle.
I think in the song,
rough and tumble.
In the translation in the song, she says it means rough and tumble, basically.
Yeah, so
because she uses it in two different ways, and it's not always amongst men.
Yeah, no, it's very suggestive. But it is kind of meant to be these men who live this harder, edgier,
it's toxic masculinity,
lifestyle.
Basically.
Yeah, basically. It's this really aggressive form of masculinity, and it's definitely connected strongly in this movie with themes of the criminal world.
Yeah.
Within France in the 1950s. And what's interesting about that, to me at least, and the thing that kind of makes this movie really grasp you, besides just the entertainment of watching the heist be planned and pulled off, is the interesting characters that we have. Because, I mean, some of them are introduced, or one of them is like introduced, for instance, as like this really nice family man. Like he's really nice to his son and his wife, but also like you also know that this guy's he'll shoot you if he has to finish his job.
And he's got a history, which we learned pretty early on, with our other main character. And I'm going to have to pull up names here because it's hard to describe them.
I can't remember his exact name because it's big in French. Yeah, which essentially is like a location. So it's like calling somebody like the New Yorker.
Yeah, because he seems
like
to
that.
be like, he's got a reputation. He just got out of prison. He's got a reputation. He's done work with Joe before. I think Joe is the family man. And then they also team up with Mario a little later on. And
Mario is the safecracker / lover boy.
Yeah, and then we have Caesar. Who is the Italian? So no, Caesar is the safecracker.
Caesar's the safecracker.
Caesar's the safecracker, who's actually apparently played by Jules Dassin himself. Really? That's interesting. And then
he just did it so he could play the bathtub scene.
Well, no, because that's the Italian is the one who gets together with the dancer. The Mario is the one with the bathtub scene, and he has the wife / girlfriend. Who's always very suggestively dressed every time she comes on.
I see. Okay.
So, yeah, those are our four characters. And that's one of the things we got to get into is that heist films are heavily revolved around the team and the different characters that make up that team. Yeah.
It's very much, it's not unlike a sports team in a lot of ways. Like there's specific roles that are expected to be filled and used. And it's used as part of the plot to both create challenges for the characters, build character relationship, and just straight up provide entertainment for the audience. The first section of the film is basically just about recruiting. Somebody wants to pull a job and he has to go find all of his people, and that's what they do in this movie.
Someone always says no, and then they come around.
Yep. There's always no, there's always those roadblocks, which are important to making a compelling story. But in this one, in heist movies, they're very formulaic.
Yeah.
And what is kind of just a really entertaining way, because it works. It's functional. You could say it's rote, but it's just effective.
Yeah. And especially if you have enough interesting characters. I mean, that's what we're going to see is basically what carries Oceans is just kind of following all the different characters and the actors who play them. Here, it's the characters
and it's just about the actors.
It's really just about the actors. We'll get to that in a bit. But here it's, we've got these different characters, and they all like, they're kind of fun to watch at first, and then things get really dark, and we have to see
you see the Rififi side.
Yeah, we see the Rififi side.
You see the Rififi of the world. But one of the things I do really enjoy about this, and this plays into the heist movie aspect is just how clever the heist is, both in the planning phase and when they pull it off.
Apparently it's based on a real heist.
I believe it, because the ones that are effective are always just freaking wacky.
Yeah.
But even I think
like down to the umbrella, it's real.
The umbrella is an amazing moment on screen. One, it's just super cinematic because it's so visual, and it provides a certain sense of dynamic action on screen when all of your physical actors are being really slow. There's not a lot of movement from the humans on screen, and there's no talking because it's all tense. So you can keep it tense and still provide this really clever visual interest where they've drilled a hole and suddenly they bring out an umbrella and you're like, what are they doing? Oh, that's what they're doing. Or even one of my other favorite moments is during the planning phase when they're all struggling with the alarm and suddenly someone comes up with the idea to fill it up with fire extinguisher foam, which is super clever.
Yeah.
And again, it's just moments like that I think kind of helped carry earlier versions of heist movies because they're just interesting and clever and unique and smart, not unlike almost all of the other. Or you know what? Here's maybe the best way to describe it. It's all of the cleverness of the opposite side of crime stories, where you have detectives like Sherlock Holmes piecing together really intricate puzzles, but in reverse. You see how the mystery is created on screen before your very eyes. And it's just super interesting to watch. Watch them pull this off, even though it's like 30 minutes of near silence on screen.
Yeah, there's no music during that, which I thought was really great.
Good choice.
Oh yeah. I mean,
it's a bold choice, but it's a good choice. It paid off here.
Yeah, and as much as I love Hans Zimmer, which we're going to get into in Inception, who drives a lot of the actual heist at the end of that movie, I think doing it without the sound, especially because we know that we're dealing with an alarm system, and we've heard the alarm go off like 5 times while they were testing it, and it's just so loud, and so it kind of like builds this tension, and you can hear every footstep and every drop of debris or whatever as they're cutting through the ceiling and all that kind of stuff. But I will say, like, the heist in this film takes place pretty much smack dab at the center point. I don't know if you're familiar with this kind of slightly newer way of looking at stories that's sometimes called the story clock, Alex.
Vaguely. I think I know where you're going with this, but go ahead and explain it both for me and the audience.
Yeah, so I don't know if this is something that's going to like necessarily catch on, but typically we learn about stories in kind of the witch's hat format, which is you see the peaks and valleys going from the exposition up the rising action to the top at the climax, and then down the resolution, or the falling action and then the resolution. But I've also seen this. I don't know if it was developed by, oh crud, now I'm going to forget his name. One of the guys who works at Red Giant, which is a visual effects software company, kind of came up with this idea of the story clock, where you have a circle with different kind of clock ticks, and you kind of can map the beats of a story around the clock, and you can see how different stories develop in the way that they play out in time on screen. And so it's interesting, like what you put at the 6 o'clock mark versus what you put at the 3 o'clock mark, and just how those elements progress. And here in Rififi, I think that the heist takes place right at the 6 o'clock mark. And so almost half of the film is the fallout after they've gotten away with the loot.
Yeah, there was something else we were talking about recently on the podcast where they save almost all the action for the back half of the movie. And when done correctly, it not only builds tension for release, but it also gets you invested in the story because you've seen the characters act for so long.
Yeah.
It also provides context. If we see them spend half of the clock, we see how they react to certain challenges.
Yeah, you have to set it up from, 0 to 6. You have to set up all the characters and all the things in a way that we're interested enough to carry another 6 tick marks of the fallout, because we have set the characters up so well and we've seen them work together as a team and have that, a kind of trust that's kind of unique amongst criminals, which has repercussions in the second half of the film. But once we've built that up, then we're ready to follow them. Once the family man's kid gets stolen, once the Italian starts to rat on them and that kind of thing. And we start to see those relationships that we've built at the beginning either strengthen or unravel in the second half. And we can hang with it for another hour because we've set it up so well in the first hour.
Exactly. It's always important to be invested in your stories, and that's part of the reason. It's what makes you care about the whole thing overall. Because otherwise you're just watching action unfold on screen. Yeah. And this movie in particular actually always felt to me like it takes place in kind of like 4 acts instead of 3. I actually don't love the idea of it being a 3-act structure, because it's more of a 4-act structure, really.
Yeah.
That we talk about when we talk about 3-act structure. You can split that second act into 2 parts. The first part where the characters,
you can even go back to Shakespeare with the 5 acts.
Yeah. Except the 5th act's always so stubby.
It's kind of just wedged in there.
It's just a tag. It's just hanging there. But the first half of the second act is typically when things are going well for the characters and they're making progress.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second half of the second act is typically when things start to go really bad for the characters and they get to that low point. They're technically like the same. Essentially, the people have just like lumped everything in the second act together to just being called not the end and not the beginning.
Yeah, because the climax is usually like 75% of the way through the film or later.
Yeah, no, it's typically pretty close to the end, and part of the third act. It's typically the third act bridge.
Yeah,
But yeah, in this one, that idea is just really clearly presented, because they spend a quarter of the movie basically coming up with the plan and recruiting, and then the second act planning and preparing, and then the second half of the second act is the heist, and then the third act, or fourth act in this case, is the fallout from the heist.
All that's to say, which is why sometimes looking at the story in terms of a clock is a little easier, because you have a lot more kind of anchor points than the Witch's Hat provides.
It also shows that, not all time is equal.
Yeah.
You can stretch out, like the first act of this movie probably takes place over the course of a few days, and then the heist of the movie, which takes up probably the same amount of time on screen, takes place over
like an hour.
Yeah.
Or a couple hours. I don't know how long it took them. I think it takes them a little while to dig through. I don't know how long it takes them to dig through the ceiling, but once they get in, it's like an hour.
Yeah.
So yeah, digging. But I do want to kind of get into some of that back half stuff. So there's some interesting tidbits I was finding, like on Wikipedia, including the fact that the bit where Le Stéphanois has to shoot Caesar for breaking the thieves' code of silence because he ratted on Mario. And so Le Stéphanois shoots him, and apparently that is not in the book at all and was added as kind of a thumb at the Hollywood system for blacklisting, for the way that the blacklisting was happening at the time, and how the House of Un-American Activities Committee was asking other actors to rat out other actors and that kind of thing, which, as we've seen, Dassin was basically a victim of that. And I think it's even more interesting now that I realize that Dassin plays Caesar, who gets shot in that scene, because that's exactly what happened to him. And so he kind of threw that in there as a really subtle kind of nod to that, which works really well on a character and story level.
I don't know, how subtle is it?
It's not subtle at all, but it works really well for the film, and also like if you understand that background political motivation, it's also makes it that much more interesting.
Within the context of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that tracks. That makes sense. That is a very 50s Hollywood thing.
Yeah, apparently the book, though, was not that great to begin with, because after the film came out, Francois Truffaut said, Dassin took the worst crime novel I've ever read and turned it into one of the best films I've ever seen. There's also that interesting thing at the end of this film where it's one of these films that you can't really make the same way today, based on a really superficial change in the times, which is specifically cell phones. Like, the ending of this film does not work with cell phones.
Cell phones validate a lot of stuff in movies, and it makes it much harder to navigate a lot of stuff because, well, let me put it this way: it provides a world of opportunities, but it's a newer ground for writing them on, especially in this kind of like high intense crime situation, because you learn how to write by reading and watching things that have already been made. And if you grow up with things that don't involve cell phones because they're written in a time where there weren't cell phones and you're trying to write with them, it's harder.
Yeah.
Now in 20 or 30 years, when all the stuff that's out there that's a little more modern involves it won't be nearly as hard.
Yeah.
Maybe even now, in fact.
Until the time. I mean, yeah, one of the best instances of using a cell phone really well in this kind of like crime environment is actually from the Bourne films, when I think it's in Ultimatum, when Bourne is talking the journalist through the subway station, and then he breaks from Bourne's instructions and gets sniped down. So that is a way to still use suspense and that kind of thing, but with that element of communication that's universal now. But in Rififi, we have a huge chunk of the film that is one character waiting on information from another character who does not always have access to a telephone to keep him updated, and that mistimed information causes the tragic ending. Yeah.
Man, that ending though, it's just brutal.
Yeah, it is. And it's progressive too. It just kind of one thing after another, like, is just off enough. And then of course we get that really ironic twist where after all of this, after they've spent so much time hiding and trying to keep the money for themselves and away from the other guy and away from the police, then he just kind of winds up, dead in the car with the money in the back seat, and this whole crowd starts gathering, and they just pick up the suitcase, and you're like, okay, so no one gets it. The authorities end up getting it anyway.
Yeah, it was all for nothing. And that was actually what I was talking about when I mentioned that this genre kind of still is hailing from those noir gangster film roots, where those who have done wrong must be punished.
Yeah.
Those who live in the Rififi suffer the Rififi.
And in this one, yeah, it feels consistent. It doesn't feel like a justice must prevail kind of thing. It feels like you play with fire, you get burned kind of thing. It's a natural consequence.
Yeah, it definitely felt like, oh, this is just the nature of living in the Rififi.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm using Rififi right. I have no
We're just going
to
keep using it enough and we'll hit it sometimes.
Yeah, it'll make enough sense. But it's just the consequence. It's the natural order of things. It's the food chain. If you take money, if you're the kind of person who takes money, you're in a world of people who take money, which means somebody might come and take that money from you.
Yeah.
So it's not like justice is served in the sense that like they're apprehended or arrested or even killed in a shootout with the cops. Like, they're just victims to the life they chose.
Do you remember the alternate ending of Cholet that we covered forever ago, where in one version the good guy curb stomps the crap out of the bad guy, and then in the censored version, right before he actually finishes the final battle, the police just walk in and say, "Things must be handled in the official way, and we will take it from here." And they just arrest the bad guy and walk off.
Yep.
So it's not exactly like that, but it is where those who have done wrong do get kind of a natural consequence. And it has this kind of, what is it worth it in the end if you lose your life, but you gain $120 million?
You can't do anything with $120 million when you're dead.
Not much. There are a couple characters that we haven't mentioned, like the wife and the mistress.
Yeah, they exist.
They're not exactly like femme fatales or anything, but they do a little bit of kind of coming in and out of the story. Although our main guy, Le Stéphanois, is just like a jerk. And that first scene with I don't know if they were married before he went to prison or if they were just together. But it makes you not like him very much right from the beginning. Yep. But you realize what kind of a character he is at the same time. Yeah.
There's definitely an aspect of these characters that makes you not enjoy being so interested in them. Yeah. It makes you interested in them, but you don't like that you find them so fascinating, which is kind of the whole deal around any sort of storytelling or entertainment involving people who are up to no good, or like the entirety of true crime. Like, you're interested. Is kind of weird morally that you are, but you're still interested.
And I think the last thing to bring up before we move on for this film, because it's going to take on a twist by the end of the conversation, but
what's the twist?
Well, we haven't talked about.
Are you M. Night Shyamalaning me right now?
No, but we're going to get Christopher Nolan here in a little bit, and
dang. He's never ruined an animated franchise before.
Oh, gosh. One of the things that is usually essential, but we're going to see not always, to a heist film is a MacGuffin, which is whatever it is that they're trying to steal, which is usually a physical thing. And, in this case, we have the jewels. And so the MacGuffin is kind of us chasing the jewels and then trying to keep the jewels or turn them into money or keep the money or whatever, which ultimately we're interested in the characters and their relationships and what they're going to do because of the MacGuffin and not the MacGuffin itself. And that's also going to be the case with Oceans, and that kind of has an even more ironic twist at the end. But then Inception will throw kind of a wrench on the whole MacGuffin thing, which I think is really interesting, and one of the things that elevates it beyond kind of the standard heist films. So that's just one of the things to bring up, is that Rififi does revolve around this MacGuffin of the jewels, which we get why they would want them, but we as the audience don't really care.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely don't care about $120 million worth of jewels.
Well, not that you can't get your hands on because you're sitting on your couch watching them steal it. Not that anyone in the 50s was sitting on their couch watching this, but
yeah, they wish.
Maybe
someone who's really rich.
Yeah, that's true. All right, so shall we move on to Ocean's 11 from 1960? We do need to specify that. Jason, take it away.
Ocean's 11 from 1960. Danny Ocean and Jimmy Foster used to serve in the 82nd Airborne during World War II. The two recruit 9 of their old comrades to help them pull off a heist job in Las Vegas on New Year's Eve. Each have their own motivations, but together, the 11 of them will hit every casino in Vegas in one night.
Yo, 11. Did that song make any sense?
It sounds good.
It sounds good, but it doesn't make any sense.
Doesn't make any sense, like a lot of this movie.
Yeah. I do think it's interesting that Frank Sinatra is one of the only characters who doesn't have a song, I think.
It's weird. I don't know.
This movie should have been a musical. Can we just throw that out there?
They should have just gone all the way with it and done that.
Really? It's half a musical.
There's a movie called Robin and the Seven Hoods, which is like the Rat Pack all over again, except it's a musical.
Oh, okay.
But it kind of goes all the way in it, because this one is just, it's got like the 60s widescreen and the Technicolor and the music's fun, but it's just the Rat Pack hanging out making a movie in Vegas.
It really is.
they're just chilling together. And part of it is literally just, hey, we've got these big star names and it'll get X number of money. Just go watch them on screen. So it makes sense from that angle. There's one of the more interesting things about this movie, other than the plot, which is very piecemeal. Like it just like the scenes seem so like individually written and stuck together, and part of that's because of how the production logistics went down.
Yeah,
where you have like these 11 famous people, really famous people, who you're trying to get together, but they could never like. I think there's one scene with everybody in it, and I don't even know if they actually have a master shot in that scene of everybody in it.
Well, they do have the very last shot of them all walking.
There you go.
Which I haven't confirmed, but I feel like that was kind of riffed on by Tarantino in Reservoir Dogs.
It could have been. There's also a shot in Rififi that looks very much like the walk up in Reservoir Dogs.
Okay.
It makes sense to have the gang walking in a line looking cool for a heist movie.
Especially when you have the Ocean's cast.
Yes. But a lot of these scenes, they could only get like 2 or 3 characters there at a time.
Yeah.
So it's very much written with that in mind. And then like for the second half of the movie, Sammy Davis Jr. is just driving around in a truck.
Yeah, it's true.
Like by himself. He's just like in a truck. And it very much feels that way. Like, who do we have today on the docket? Oh, let's have him interact. And like this one guy shows up and says something to Sammy Davis Jr. in his truck. And the scene's like 10 seconds long.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
Dean Martin sings the same song like 5 times.
It's very stuck together. That being said, it's still kind of fun.
Yeah, no, it's very style over substance. Like,
very much.
It's a lot of people who are kind of setting the style for the time. You've got Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford. You've got all these people who.
Oh, you're not going to name all of them?
Oh gosh, I have to go through the whole thing.
I'm joking.
But all these people who are very much in the public eye, they are kind of the it crowd. And you've got a production design, which is practically a big 60s like musical in terms of the set design and the colors and the costuming. Like everything feels very meticulous. It's all eye candy. You have a fun plot. Like you get the point. You get all the pieces of the heist like really quickly. So you don't have to spend a lot of time like breaking down exactly how it's going to go down, or what might be the actual technical limitations of blowing out an entire city's power and that kind of thing. You just set like a couple of rules that generally make sense. You can kind of hang with it, and then you just watch these guys do their thing, which is usually singing. Which I mean, they're all basically playing themselves. I think at some point, Frank Sinatra, like when he was approached for the film, was like, forget the film, let's just actually pull the heist. That kind of thing. I mean, not that this is the most complicated heist. Like we saw with Rififi, we spent a lot of time like breaking down exactly every element of the heist. And this one is like, yeah, we're going to blow out this thing. We're going to walk in. We're just going to steal the stuff out of the vaults and it'll be easy. But how all that works doesn't really matter. But it's like the cool, I love the shots of like the glowing footprints and like the glow paint and stuff like that. Just because it looks cool.
Some cool stuff in there. Overall, though, I kind of felt the heist portion a little lacking.
Yeah, and it's also like really short. It's
really short. They spend so long just setting up the heist. So long, and that's
the
actually
setup
what I was
is
talking
going
about.
One character to another and saying, "Hey, you love this person, watch them do a fun scene. Hey, you love this person, watch them do a fun scene."
Yes, there's 11 of those.
Yeah, that's
and it's nuts. Like Sammy Davis Jr. is just singing on a railroad track for some reason, like
on a cooler around a bunch of other guys in jumpers.
Yeah, and I mean, like technically they gave like Dean Martin like a motivation, but like it's really shoved in there.
Yeah. And then they have the Cesar Romero plot line towards the end, which we do spend some time of after the heist has been pulled. All the casino owners are trying to figure out who stole it. Cesar Romero is like, he's kind of the white collar criminal, whereas the crime that they are committing is a little more nitty gritty. But he's just going to swoop in.
Do you mean white collar, like the show that ran for years on USA?
Not quite, but something along those lines. Which is also technically a heist show. But yeah, so there is that extra plot where you get a little bit of this like suspense thing. Will they be found out? Will they have to give up the money? Blah, 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 blah. But again, even that, it's not suspenseful. It's just fun to watch all these characters be together. Yeah. That's really it. They're just together and you're watching them.
Yeah. Back in the days when you didn't have like a million YouTube videos of your favorite celebrities that you could watch it any given moment, like this was as good as it gets. Like go see Frank Sinatra hang out with his buddies for a while.
Oh my gosh, there's got to be another movie that has done the same thing recently. I'm trying to think. Like I would almost say that the new Oceans, like the remakes of this, is that? No, not that new, but the remake of Oceans 11 through 13. But I feel like they added more heist stuff to that, even though it still has more an all-star cast.
Because we got so into special effects between then and now.
Yeah.
And unique shots and stuff like that. Like they really got into.
But I feel like there's got to be a film that's come out recently that was literally just watch all these famous people in the same movie together.
Oh, well, they did those. There was a big, I don't know if you remember, like, I think it was like in the mid 2010s. They came out with like a series of movies, the eponymous today, that was essentially just named after holidays. Like there was like Christmas Eve and Valentine's Day or New Year's or something like that. And it was just like 16 different vignette stories that interlocked with each other. And it was just famous people running into each other, playing other characters. Like, okay, that was it. That was the whole movie. And they were just like, oh, watch these famous people kiss. You want to go see that? There's no story, but look at that.
Yeah. I almost feel like this has almost been democratized to the point where there are certain directors who every one of their movies is almost that kind of thing. Now, the movies usually have more substance to them. Like, I would even say, our go-to directors that we always talk about both fall in this category.
They have their
Nolan and Anderson both have these huge actors that show up in almost every one of their films.
They're so tall. They're like 8 feet tall.
They're just huge actors. They have to build giant sets. Peter Jackson actually works on all their films to help them. But
the perspective we have to do these days. And then Tom Cruise is out there just like 3 feet tall, just real life hobbiting it up.
Oh man. But you've got these big names that are filling these filmmakers' films, and you go, not a small portion of the reason you go to those films is because of who's in them, as well as the trust that you have in the director itself, or himself or herself. So I feel like it still exists to some extent, but there's usually a little bit more behind it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. But this is typical 60s fare, especially when you consider that like this is still at the same time that they're doing widescreen and Technicolor to combat the upswing in TV purchases, and the downswing, the corresponding downswing in Americans spending money on the movies. You can't go see Frank Sinatra hang out with Dean Martin and all his buds on
in color. Can you imagine watching this film full screen in black and white?
Oh, this would not be a very good movie in black and white. This would be a terrible movie in black and white.
Even with the stars.
I think that's the only time I've ever actually thought that about a movie, where it being in color or black and white actually like dramatically changed the quality of the movie. Yeah. But it would. This would be an awful movie in black and white.
Yeah, completely agree. Okay, so yeah, we have the kind of ironic ending, which I actually like. I think it doesn't leave you feeling completely let down, because it's still a fun ending where they end up.
It's functional.
Yeah, they end up accidentally cremating all the money. And so again, it's that I feel like a lot of these heist films almost come back to I feel like all these heist films kind of come back to a Treasure of the Sierra Madre kind of an ending, which Sierra Madre obviously I think pulls it off way better. But I was thinking treasures like Gold Rush movies are kind of heist movies. It's just that the money that they're looking for doesn't technically belong to anyone.
And the security guard is nature.
The security guard is nature, and your odds, which are very low.
Yeah. I mean, just like the Gold Rush.
Yeah, but it's a ashes to ashes, dust to dust kind of a thing where the money ends up becoming worthless in one way or another to you, whether it's because you're dead or because you lost the money somehow. But yeah, so I guess the last kind of overarching things is does this film work as a heist film, and does the star power and the glamour make up for it if not?
It's a decent enough watch. It's definitely, I think it's more notable for inspiring the modern series than anything else at this point. And it's definitely functional movie making, but it's such an example of star vehicle to the extreme.
Yeah.
But it's like holding that line too on the ratings on like Letterboxd and IMDb, where it's like it just passes.
Yeah.
Like it's a C-.
Because it doesn't technically do anything wrong, but it doesn't really put a lot of effort into going above and beyond. All right, so with that, let's move on to our final film and the most different, but still solidly in the heist realm, Inception from 2010. Jason, set us up.
Inception from 2010. Dom Cobb hasn't seen his kids in years after being charged with the murder of his wife. He's also an extractor, a person who specializes into diving into the dreams of others to steal information. Together with his co-worker Arthur, he's offered a huge job by a rich businessman, Saito, who says he can offer Cobb a clean slate so he can return to his children. Cobb can't say no, but there's a catch. Instead of stealing information, they must plant it, without the dreamer knowing where it came from. Inception. Cobb and Arthur recruit the team. Eames, an identity forger. Yusuf, a chemist who creates dream sedative. And Adriadne, the newbie and architect. Together, they plan a complex, multi-dream level reverse heist that faces a number of wild complications and the interference of ghosts from Cobb's past.
All right, Alex. I've seen this movie before. I think you've seen this movie before?
Yeah, I mean, we saw it at the same time.
Yeah, this should be pretty familiar to most people. But I think it does bring a lot of really interesting angles to the heist genre, because it's not literally a heist film because they're not stealing anything, except technically at the very beginning, I guess.
They're reverse stealing.
They're putting something new where there was nothing, as opposed to taking something away that was there.
It's so edgy.
It's so edgy. But also,
this is one of those combo films where they combine genres. This is a sci-fi movie, but also a heist movie.
Apparently, at some point in the development process, Nolan was thinking about writing it as a horror film, which is interesting.
I could see that.
But then he kind of turned it into a heist film, but then he was like, heist films are usually really shallow. And I think the idea of dreams is such a good kind of like psychological thing. And this is one of the things that I really want to hit on is, like I brought up before, usually a heist is driven by a MacGuffin, which is something that the characters want so bad that they're willing to break the law for it. They're willing to do things that they ordinarily wouldn't do, or would, I guess, if they're lifetime criminals, which we see a lot. But here, the thing that's driving everything is psychology and character development, not only of Cobb, the main character, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, but also of I guess he's not even the antagonist, because Maul is the antagonist, and yet Maul is Cobb's So
Cobb's the antagonist.
Which is also something that I want to get into because Nolan also calls Mal like the epitomal femme fatale, basically, because in noir films, as we've talked about before, we've done several episodes on noir films. The femme fatale is the main character's undoing because she gets inside their head. She kind of embodies their weaknesses or their fears or whatever, and that becomes their downfall. Here, Mal is literally only in Cobb's head. She is a manifestation of all of his fears and regrets in a character form. So it's like the purest form of a femme fatale. And so all of these things, all of the subconscious, the memories, the feelings, the catharsis, as it is even brought up in the film, these are the things that drive the heist. These are the things that the heist is revolving around. So I just think it's a really genius way to take out a really surface kind of uninteresting type of MacGuffin, which is just a thing that someone wants to have a better life, and you turn it into part of your story development and your character development. And character development has actual real world application as opposed to, I want money. Like seeing how people think and the way they think and the way they react to things that they regret and things that they're afraid of is much, much more interesting.
Yeah, no, this definitely becomes like a very well-developed character crisis, I would call it, by the end of the movie.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it's definitely it is multiple genres kind of mixed together, which makes it really interesting and helps it kind of like ascend beyond just being a heist movie or just being a sci-fi movie or anything like that. I don't even know if I can say at all that Mal is the antagonist because Cobb messed her up in the first place. Right, he incepted her.
That's true, but the version of Mal that we see through most of the film is just Cobb's projection of her inside of his mind. So it's not
so
like
if you're referring to Mal as like the dark part of Cobb's
the one that
mind,
shows up in
agree.
the dreams. Yeah, not the real one.
Yeah,
that.
So Cobb is the antagonist the entire time, but we don't realize that until the twist at the end.
Yeah, he's literally the protagonist and the antagonist fighting himself throughout the film.
That's fair. He also just drags everyone else into it in like a really irresponsible way. I did not.
Which
I was telling
Ariadne
you this
points
before. I was telling you this before the podcast, but it's he's a really shitty guy.
Yeah, no, he makes a lot of bad decisions.
Really not good. He's an interesting character, which is good because he propels the story, but he's really awful. Leonardo DiCaprio does a really good job playing him because you want to like him the entire time, and you kind of understand where he's coming from for most of the movie, or at least you think you do, until the very end. But then he takes responsibility for it, and you have the open ending at the end.
And he comes to his he does confront himself and has one of the purest kind of climax moments of a character changing towards the end, because again, he's literally facing himself and his own psyche. But one character that I kind of want to bring up that I think could easily kind of be mistakenly left out of the conversation is Ariadne. Are you familiar with the reference that Ariadne is?
I'm so familiar with it that I actually thought that straight up naming the character Ariadne was a little stuffy.
Too much.
But
not everyone would be so familiar with it.
This is true. But it's a Nolanism. It's a Nolan thing. Just like how he had characters legitimately say that they preferred catharsis in the movie. It was just Nolan being Nolan. You take it when you got it. Some people really enjoy it. I kind of roll my eyes whenever he does stuff like that. But also, like, it's okay because it's
better than really like other surface level things that other directors might have done.
Yeah, no, the things it's okay. He gets away with it because he's earned it. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, do you want to break it down or do you want me to?
I'll let you because I think you got a spiel.
Okay. Well, yeah, Ariadne is a reference to Greek mythology. She is a princess who provides King Theseus with a sword and a ball of yarn to lead him through the labyrinth where he has to defeat the Minotaur. And so that's literally what Ariadne does. The first thing that we see of her is she's creating a maze. And throughout the film, she has to lead Cobb through this maze, which is his own psyche, to conquer the Minotaur, which is his projection of his ex-wife. And so it is kind of ham-fisted when you look at it that way, but it's also like fairly obscure enough to not be.
Most people wouldn't get it. Yeah.
And those people who do, like me, again, I know you roll your eyes, but I love it. I eat it up because that's one of the things that gets me hooked on Nolan is just all those really deep.
I think I mentioned this to you before, but and again, kind of like with what I was telling you about the exposition in this movie, the first time I appreciate it, and then on rewatches, I'm like, okay, yeah, I get it.
Yeah, but it is kind of built for a first watch. Like this film is very heavily first watch driven.
If you get some of the twists away before you watch this movie is not nearly as good.
Yeah, I mean it's still great. I mean I don't even know how many times I've watched this film.
The visuals are epic. The characters are well developed. The exposition is very well delivered, which is good because it's such a complicated freaking world.
Mm-hmm.
The exposition is delivered almost continually through conflict. So even just little things like, hey, give him the kick. The what?
Yeah.
The kick. Drop him in the dunk him. That tells you what the kick is immediately.
And again, that's also Ariadne usually guiding the audience through the maze of the story.
And then I was about to say, and then you get to the point where you have the new person on the team, which is why, if you're ever wondering in a story, why is there always a new guy? It's because of this.
It's you. Yeah.
It's so that you can have an entry point into the world where they can explain all the shit that normally they would never have to explain in a million years. So it kind of just helps everyone process and understand what's going on.
But speaking of the exposition, there is one thing that is never exposited, which is a strength of the film because otherwise it would get really bogged down.
What's on the train?
No. Oh, that's funny. Clearly, it's a bunch of people who are escaping a global freeze. But
you think it's the Snowpiercer train?
I think it's the Snowpiercer train.
Okay.
But the technology of dream sharing is never explained. It's assumed throughout the entire thing, and you just roll with it. It doesn't matter. Like they put these little, they put these IVs in their arm. They push a button, and everyone's in the same dream. It doesn't matter how that happens. We get a little bit of like it was developed for the military, so they could kill people without actually killing them. Okay, cool, that makes sense. And then we just roll with it. But if he got into like the nitty gritty of, if he went Jules Verne on trying to explain how it works.
You don't have to say midichlorians because the second you say midichlorians, it gets dumb.
It becomes a different kind of a movie, basically.
Yeah, and you can. That's okay. Like sometimes you gotta obscure the shark, like from Jaws. You don't need to look at it too hard if it's not that important. Like if we don't need to know the mechanics of dreaming of the machine that well. In order to understand the movie. Like stuff like the sedative is important, and so they explain it. Stuff like the kick is important, and so they explain it. One of the things that I actually really enjoyed this time around when I watched all the dreaming sequences is it looks like they're all on drugs. Like they straight up put an IV in their arm and then pass out and have a psychedelic experience.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And I don't think that's like any kind of direct connection to anything. I just think it's like good imagery to kind of compare, especially in this world of dreams.
Yeah.
All right. So Jonathan, what did you think?
Go for it.
Because I know this is kind of the origin of it, and it's been abused to high hell ever since. But what do you think about the Hans Zimmer noise?
I mean, I'm a Hans Zimmer fan. This still has, I think Time is still going to be one of the most classic soundtrack tracks for a long time. But it's just part of the movie for me now. I don't really think about it as like, it doesn't really grate on me just because I accept it for what it is. But I do understand where people are coming from when they kind of redo it over and over and over again. And you're like, okay, we get it. It's enough.
That's kind of what happened. There was a lot of buzz around the Inception trailer because it showed all of these crazy VFX of like the world bending in half, and these weird geometric architectural. There were a lot
of memes of the trailer before the movie even came out.
Yeah, and it was super popular because it was super good. But then every movie after that for like a solid 2 or 3 years, maybe longer, had that blah noise in it, and it just got exhausting. And it's really good in this movie. It's just a shame that it got overused by everyone else there. But that's one of the tragedies of success is poor imitation.
Yeah, it's a side effect of originality, basically. Oh gosh. I mean, I guess along those lines, and this is still kind of a tangent from the film itself, but it really bothers me the way that Inception has been assimilated into common vernacular, because the tacking on "ception" onto something in order to imply that it's the same thing within the same thing is not what Inception means. Inception means a creation or a genesis point, the beginning of something.
But we have to go deeper, Jonathan.
What you're saying when you're saying, when you stack your solo cups and you say cupception, what you really mean is cup recursion, which is a coding term. But no one seems to do
Jonathan,
that.
I have some bad news for you.
What?
It's been used so much that's just what the suffix means now.
Is it in the dictionary?
It probably isn't, but that's not like an official source. That's just how languages work, and language is weird. And once something gets popular enough, it just sticks. And that's how it is. It's all made up. So yeah, definitely for sure for like a while there, like you're right. And it is silly that it changed because of a meme, but by now it's just been used so much that that's just probably what "ception" as a suffix can. It's an additional meaning for the term now.
Yeah. But that's just an aside. And again, these are all things that are like, they're kind of just proof points of how popular and well made this film is, and then how kind of distorted that can be after the fact. But about the film itself, I think it's interesting that we've kind of been talking about the way that we are doing this huge character development on Cobb, but we're also kind of doing the same type of character development on Cillian Murphy's character, Fisher, who
he actually has a really good story arc. He has a really wholesome story arc.
He's not an antagonist. They're doing something, I guess, morally questionable, but even the way it's presented doesn't really make it seem like a bad thing. Yeah, it's
like a very invasive and non-consensual form of therapy.
Yeah. So yeah, technically, what they're doing is a net good.
You could
the way you think about
somehow call it. You could probably call this mind rape and be correct.
Oh, yeah, but that's not what the film feels at all.
But also, our characters aren't good people.
That's true. I mean, you could argue that yes, Cobb makes a lot of really bad decisions, but most of the other characters, we don't really see them do.
We don't get a lot of development on a lot of the other characters, which works because when you look at a movie like this, typically I would complain about something like that. You have all these characters who are ostensibly kind of interesting, but in this movie where there's so much development around Cobb and Maul,
they're all support for that development.
There's just no room. This is such a long movie already. Just explaining the dream and Cobb's character development takes up like 90% of this movie. And then the other 10% is gunshots and that one classical music song.
Oh yeah, the Edith Piaf song.
So that's been used in a commercial recently where everyone's driving around with something stuck on top of their cars. and it just drove me up the wall flipping between the two. Like it.
Here's a fun.
It was really driving me nuts.
Fun tidbit, completely incidental, but there is a film called La Vie en Rose, which is a biopic of Edith Piaf, who sings that song. It's a very famous French song, and Marion Cotillard plays Edith Piaf in that film.
Interesting.
And so that's just kind of like a fun overlap between the in the film world. But yeah, so here's the thing, Alex. Let's just go ahead and get right into the ending. Do you have like any strong feelings about the ending or opinions, I guess? The very, very ending.
When I was but the wee lad watching this movie for the first time, I thought that the top would fall over because I wanted Cobb to be with his kids again. Mm-hmm. When I rewatched it, I kind of thought it would make more sense from a story standpoint for him to be stuck in his own dream, but with his kids.
If that's the case, when do you think that happened? Or do you think it happened before the story even kicks off?
But also, there is a chance that the entire story is a dream, but honestly, that's almost too complicated for Nolan.
Which is a bold claim.
And two, it kind of invalidates a lot of the stuff that happens in the story.
Well, it invalidates the whole story, which is why that is a cop-out.
Which is why it would essentially, it would be a cop-out.
I have a very specific thought about when...
I feel like it should keep spinning. I feel like he should be in his dream. And in fact, the real ending isn't the fact that whether or not the top falls over. It's the fact that he decides not to look.
Yes, that's something that Nolan points out.
It's the fact that he goes and greets his children and hugs them again. That's the true end of the movie.
Because when he knows he's in the dream, he refuses to look when Maul calls.
Yeah, that's a big point. And one of the things I was also thinking about was like, even if he is stuck in a dream, then he's also just like asleep on the plane. Like he's gonna wake up in like...
No, he's not. See, this is the thing that, because I can't really call it one way or the other, but there is a point. If he is dreaming at the end of the film, I know exactly when it happens. And it's when they go to the basement of the chemist, because there they have all these people who are heavily sedated. And what he says is they come to sleep for like 3 or 4 hours, which gives them like years in the dream. And so then reality becomes kind of their fantasy, because they have turned their dream into their reality. And when he goes down there, we get this moment where like, you want to try it out? And so Cobb goes under, and we get like flashes of, Maul and all of his regrets and stuff. And then he wakes up gasping, and he goes to the bathroom, splashes water on his face, and he tries to spin the top, but it falls on the ground. And he never spins the top again for the rest of the film until that last shot. So I think he would be in the chemist shop, heavily sedated, just still living in his dream. So in that case, pretty much the whole heist becomes invalidated, but it seems from a story point where it fits the best. Yeah.
I think the most likely thought to me is that he actually is home with his kids. Yeah. And the idea is that he's just not going to look anymore, or that him leaving that away is him leaving aside this world of dreams, hopefully permanently. Because there is kind of, although it's not really delved into, although I guess it is in that basement, this idea of it being addictive like a drug. Yeah. Where these people are just zonked out, and it makes you do crazy things like rob people's brains to get money to do it again.
Yeah. And there's one other kind of really technical point that it's not ever exposited well enough to really make a decision, but they make a big point about the totems being individual to every single person. And if another person knows how your totem works, then it invalidates your reality check. And the fact of the matter is that the top is Maul's totem. We don't even know what Cobb's true totem is because he always has Maul's totem with him. So I don't even know if that totem works for him.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's how he incepted her.
Yeah. So
Maulception.
I don't know how that works. I don't know if like spouses can share a totem or whatever, but
I think legally they can.
Legally they probably can. So, but anyway, again, the totems are never technically described. Yeah, the totems are still never technically described. Like, why can't someone else touch it or whatever? I assume it's because then they could fake it or something in the dream, or I don't know. But that's just another interesting thing. And there are other things that people have brought up, just as long as we're talking about the ending, kind of throwing all the different conjectures out there. Like the people have kind of watched for when Cobb is wearing his wedding ring. And if he's not wearing it, then he's in the real world. If he is wearing it, then he's in a dream. And I think in the last shot, he's not wearing it. I think even Michael Caine pointed out that the dad character is never in the dreams, but he is there at the end. So that also is a tick on the side of reality. But the fact that the film is so open-ended and creates so much discussion and leads you back into the film to keep rewatching it and keep evaluating these characters and their decisions and that kind of thing is also just a really good movie experience. Like that, it just is one of the things that keeps Inception on this list of like classic films that we're still watching and talking about and debating 10 years later.
Yeah, it's certainly one of Nolan's best.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And it has a lot of his hallmarks, but it also has kind of this, which is weird to say, but this like groundedness to it. Like it doesn't have magic like The Prestige. It doesn't have space travel like Interstellar. It's not based on a comic book. But it does have the dream sharing, which is a vague kind of
it's not
sci-fi
too far
techno
out of this
jargon.
world.
But yeah, all the characters and the events are grounded enough that
we all had a weird dream before, man.
I know, yeah, and so it's a universal experience. So it has like a lot more entry points than some of his other films. And I mean, Nolan has done other crime films before, like actually, most of his films are kind of crime films. But Following was basically a heist film. And Memento was not a heist film, but it was a crime film. But this one it also has like a bit of a gloss to it. Like it's really easy to watch. It's not super dark. But it still does have those really complex elements to it.
I guess, I would call it Following a movie about heists, but I don't know if I would call it a heist film.
Yeah, no, it's more generally noir.
Yeah, when we're getting into the heist film subgenre, we're getting to a very specific setup.
Yeah, and they're usually big heists. Like they do some like petty breaking and entering robberies.
Yeah. Heist is a good genre to mix with other things. I think we should. Do you want to slide into overall notes?
I think we're in overall notes now.
Because it just works so well with other things. It's like sci-fi, but a heist. Or actually, one of my favorite book series is a fantasy book series where people have magical powers and stuff, but a heist. And it's really cool. It just
one of my favorite book series is a heist too, The Hobbit.
Yeah, hey, that's actually a perfect point. Hobbit follows the heist formula.
Almost exactly, yeah.
You recruit a team, you develop a plan, you execute it, there's problems, you get in, you steal it, you get out, there's still problems, and then you have to reconcile with your actions.
You just add some dwarves and some dragons and you're good to go.
I was about to say that middle part is really long, and then I realized that it isn't. It's only long in the movies.
Yeah, I mean, it is still most of the book, but it's, not as drawn out as the films made it out to be.
I mean, it's not a Tolkien book if there's not a lot of walking and just like some description of trees.
That's true. The trees are very important.
All right, Jonathan, one of the things that I like the most about heist movies is just how clearly structured they are compared to almost any other subgenre.
I mean, the act of a heist is pretty well structured to begin with, so it's a great starting point.
It's literally something that's all about procedure, and it has very, very clear points where you put in complications, where you put in inventiveness, where you put in character introductions. It's a genre that kind of comes with a blueprint, like character recruits other characters, develop plan, execute plan, things go wrong, they fix those things, and then they get away or they don't. And that's like it. Like that's the whole structure of a heist movie. And you can come up, and then the fun part is what you can come up with to fill in those slots about characters, about the heist itself. What can you do to make it interesting and unique and fun and compelling? But the structure itself is kind of just there.
Yeah. No, it gives you your setup, your big, and the interesting thing is that the heist is not the climax. The heist is kind of incidental for the most part.
Yeah, and part of the reason is that the heist takes so long that it can't be the climax. It's
unless it's Oceans.
Well, and then they've done the whole thing already.
Yeah. And I mean, we should kind of like break down the kind of, along with the formula, the tropes that go along, because now that, I mean, we start with Asphalt Jungle, basically start with Asphalt Jungle, and then we move on to things like Rififi, and there are a couple others that come out in the mid 50s, like The Killing is actually the year after Rififi, and so we start to kind of get a couple different variations on the same theme, and then by the 60s, it's so established that we can just kind of use it as a backdrop mainly. I mean, when we're talking about Oceans, and then by the 2010s, obviously we're kind of taking that skeleton and we're creating something completely new from it. But there are still things that carry throughout all of them because it is so kind of formulaic. So we have our characters, we have our mastermind, we have our safecracker, we have I think Inception is the only one of these films, but it's still pretty common or understood kind of character of like a forger, the new guy, or the one who is a little more chicken than the rest of them. You know, they all have these same types of characters. That's part of what builds the team. And then it's just, you know, creating slight variations and who you cast in those roles that makes a difference from one film to another.
Yeah. It gives you good, strong bones to kind of structure your story around. And then, you know, if you're up to the task, you can make something really inventive out of it. There is also kind of like this angle to heist movies where the fact that they're inherently thieves, more than likely.
Yeah.
I've seen one or two twists where there's a heist, but they're not really thieves.
That Inception falls in that category.
Does it?
I mean, Cobb is a thief at the beginning. Ariadne never really does it. She never steals anything. She's not a crime. I mean, she's brand new.
So she is brand new, but she signs up to be a dream infiltrator real fast.
The job she signs up for is not thievery, though.
Well, this is not thievery. I also wouldn't say that the job she signed up for is morally clear.
Right. But you called them thieves, so just throwing that out there.
So this is fair. This is fair. I called them thieves, and that's probably not accurate. But I would say that they're all exist within the Rififi world of dreams.
Okay, yeah, that's very appropriate.
They are there. And to be fair, a lot of the people in Inception don't get a lot of development. Ariadne actually gets like almost no development.
Yeah.
But she's just a lot of every character that isn't Cobb is just there to facilitate.
Yeah.
So it's across the board selfish.
Oh, have you heard the theory of Inception that and this is probably a kind of retroactive implication, but the idea that Inception is kind of a metaphor for filmmaking itself, and each
everything
person
Nolan
on the
does
team
is a metaphor for filmmaking itself.
That's true. But you have like the architect who's Ariadne, who's like the script writer. You have or maybe the architect is kind of like the cinematographer, so creating the visuals. Then you have Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character, who's kind of like explaining everything, and then you have the director, who's Cobb, who's organizing the whole thing. Yeah, you have the producer, all that kind of stuff.
The guy who gets everyone drugs.
That's a very important part of filmmaking.
Can't make a movie without it. Can't make a movie without Michael Caine.
Michael Caine.
Oh gosh. I mean, yes, yeah, but also like everything Nolan does is everything he did before Dunkirk, arguably a metaphor for movie making.
I can see it. Also, I learned a fun term. I'm gonna try and say it right. Oniric, which means pertaining to dreams, specifically in film theory, is kind of the breakdown of the psychology of depicting dreams, and breaking down how dreams work within film as a kind of dreamlike medium in itself. So there you go, oniric.
Okay, I thought you just cursed at me in ancient Egyptian or something.
It's pretty close. Yeah, I don't know what the etymology of that word is, but I mean, that's your fun linguistic lesson for the day.
Yeah, but I mean, anyway, it is an interesting genre because almost everybody in it is more or less morally gray.
Yeah.
You get the sense that they're not all bad, which is kind of key to making these movies work, because if they're just all terrible people...
And that's also kind of inherent in noirs, which we've broken down before.
Yeah. Which typically makes for really interesting stuff because it's out of the ordinary. It's not what you see on the daily basis. Probably. Maybe you do. Maybe you should rethink your life a bit.
Yeah.
But
what kind of audience do we have on this podcast, Alex?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, part of it is the excitement of seeing people be really good at something, which is always interesting. It's one of the reasons like we enjoy watching the Olympics, is watching somebody perform at something that they're really good at.
Did you just drop a foreshadowing?
I did. Go with it.
All right.
But also, doing something.
There's a skill element
that they're really good at. That's also kind of bad and verboten, which is, kind of that appeal of the forbidden fruit.
It's a vicarious thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like and of course, like the psychopath in Yi says, it lets you live a different life.
Yeah. Everyone knows like that. But yeah. And of course you have these typical character tropes or roles, but you already talked about that. That kind of fit in. You have the cops, the robbers, the forgers, the thieves, all that. I always love when there's a trope in a heist movie that's the thief. I'm like, you're all thieves.
Yeah, right.
Like, what makes that person the thief? Like, you're all thieves. But
it's usually the safecracker, though, right?
Yeah, not always. Sometimes it's like the person who has to hang upside down by ropes to pluck the diamond out of the laser wire, the laser lines, like Mission Impossible style. Any other thoughts on heist movies, Jonathan?
No, I think that's it. I do kind of want to. There was one point. This is like a really deep cut point on Inception that I want to bring up. This watch through in Inception, the character development and the overarching like psychology of the film reminded me of two other films that we've covered that we also connected when we covered them, and that's Vertigo and Solaris. Because they all three revolve around a kind of psychological trauma of a dead lover to one extent or another.
An obsession.
An obsession that gets a lot of other people in some deep crap and then leaves them in like a really messed up state by the end. I mean, Inception has more, again, catharsis than the other two. But I just thought it was interesting how similar that like really core character psychology was between those three films, which are all on their face extremely different movies.
Yeah, no, that's a good connection to make. Those movies do kind of make sense together with that kind of like obsessive reopening of the same trauma over and over again.
Yeah.
All right, Jonathan, what are we going to be talking about next time on the podcast?
Yeah, next time we will be wrapping up our sports series that we've kind of been trickling throughout this season. And this time, as opposed to fictional depictions of sports, we're going to look at some sports documentaries. And we're going to kind of span a good range of different kinds of sports. We're starting off with, as Alex has already alluded to, the Olympics, with Tokyo Olympiad from 1965. And then we're going to be talking about Hoop Dreams from 1994, which is a pretty classic documentary. And
Man, it's depressing.
And then a newer film, Senna from 2010, which is
that one's
race
also
cars.
Depressing,
that's a sport
actually.
that we haven't even talked about.
There's two kind of sad ones on there. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, that'll be an interesting set of movies to talk about. They're much more informative. I often find documentaries to be a very good palate cleanser, and I think the end of 2020 is a good time for a palate cleanser. So everyone just kind of relax, watch some people do some sports, and kind of get yourself a little cleansed at the end of the year. What do we have going on over on the Patreon, Jonathan?
Yeah, so if you'd like to support us, we do have a Patreon, so you can go over there and do that. And at any level, you can join our digital community on Discord, where we chat about movies and sometimes have movie parties or stream our recordings live, so you can listen to us mess up and forget batteries or whatever. And also we have a tier for a bonus podcast that comes out in between our every other week schedule for the main show. And the last episode that we talked about, just a couple days behind Halloween, is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from 1920. So yeah, if you'd like to get more of the Filmlings, you can check out the bonus podcast.
Yeah, we're getting spoopy over there.
Getting spooky.
All right, everybody. That's about all the time we have for this episode.
If you have movie suggestions for us or just want to reach out, I can be found on Twitter at JSSatchel.
And I'm at Alex Garinger.
And I'm at the Blue Jay, 1994.
And to find links to things that we talked about today, you can view them on the blog at thefilmlings.com.
If you like the show, let us know. Leave us a review on iTunes so other people will know what we're all about.
We definitely appreciate it.
Talk to you next time.
All right, see ya.
I don't know if you've seen those memes online, Jonathan, but everyone seems to be harping on Tolkien for spending a lot of time describing trees.
No, I've literally seen interviews where he just talks about trees like in real life. Like he's very fond of trees.
I mean, trees are general. Great. He made a whole race out of trees. Trees are dope.
Have you seen the okay, this is totally side tangent, but there's some YouTube channel, this guy made a video called If Tolkien Was Like His Worst Fans.
Oh no.
One of the guys finishes writing, he's like, here's my my new fantasy book. It's 40,000 words or whatever. And he's like, oh yeah? Mine's 3 volumes. It's all one story. Do you have any maps? Yeah, there's a map creator. It's like, oh yep, I drew all that. And then like the very last line is, okay, come on, just be proud of me. Like I made this. It's good. And the guy says, yeah, okay. Just one more question. What language do your trees talk?
Oh no. It's true.
Ultimate fantasy smackdown.
What language do your trees talk? Do I have to?
Yeah,
do I have to?
That needs to be a t-shirt.
Talking trees.
You do.
If you want. I'm just keeping like a word box of fantasy crap that needs to go in here.
Fantasy checklist.
Talking
trees.
Trees.
I mean, even Wizard of Oz has talking trees. Come on, Alex.
It's true. Okay. Can I do a talking shrubbery?
Bring me a shrubbery.